Welcome back, everybody, to this episode of the Open Concept Podcast, where we are breaking down unnecessary walls and barriers that stand in the way of greatness. Our guest today, Skye Waterson, joining us from the other side of the pond over in New Zealand. Great to have you. Really excited to get into the conversations today, specifically around ADHD, breaking down some of the ideas around it, the myths that people have. Really excited to hear your story. Also have the podcast, the ADHD Skills Lab, where you talk to other business owners, entrepreneurs, and just generally people about ADHD specifically. And I'm excited to get into it because I have a lot of friends that have young kids. I have 2 young kids myself. And it seems to be that a huge topic of conversation around school and around the teachers, and is this idea that sort of almost every kid has ADHD or is sort of labeled with ADHD, which I don't think is necessarily fair. But I'm really curious just about so much that we're going to be talking about today. Thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Very, very happy to be here. And I actually have 3 kids under 4. But I
Oh, wow.
feel like so I'm not quite at the age yet where it's becoming a thing, but I hear the parents talking. They're like, "Oh, this is interesting. Everybody has ADHD." And when I started, it was not like that. It was not something that everyone was talking about. So it's been interesting to see that trajectory.
Yeah, when I was diagnosed with ADD in high
Mm-hmm.
school, and maybe you can help us break down the difference between ADD and ADHD. But at that point, there wasn't really a lot of information about it, but it was all I knew is I was diagnosed with a learning disability, and there were some pills that were available that
Mm.
they could give me, and then that was going to help solve a few things. But that, to me, it whether I felt it or not, like I didn't feel like I had a learning disability until I was labeled with that.
Yeah.
So until my counselors and my teachers told me that there was a name for what it was that I was feeling, which in retrospect I feel was just boredom. But I didn't I didn't do necessarily all that
Mm-hmm.
well in high school. I certainly wrote it off and tended to fall asleep in class, and I just had trouble keeping
Yeah.
attention to what the teachers were saying. But they had labeled with my way of handling school as having attention deficit disorder. So they offered me extra classes, and one of their solutions was additional learning, so that I was sent to what is Sylvan Learning here. I don't know what you
Mm-hmm.
have down in New Zealand, but it was essentially going to school after school to do more of the stuff that I already didn't want to be
You're
doing.
like
And I was like, I feel like
being
this isn't
punished.
really solving much. I was like, I was being punished to do more of the thing that I was already not great at doing. And the resolve for that was to take pills, and like that was the only solution they had. So
Yeah.
knowing what I know now, is there's been huge advancements in certainly understanding in the way that ADHD and ADD is perceived. But yeah, I certainly need to know way more than I do, which is what you're here to talk about. But tell us how you, before we get started, how did you get involved in this space for people that are listening? Where was that turning point where you decided I'm gonna really start focusing on helping people in this space?
Yeah, well, it was a very sharp turning point. So I was an academic. I was studying. I finished my master's, and I didn't have trouble in school. I was terrible at maths. I was great at English, but I was very much trying to achieve. That was kind of how I dealt with it, the workaholism and all of that kind of stuff. And so when it got to my master's, I finished it, but I also wasn't sleeping. I was drinking so many energy drinks. It's crazy to think about now. And so I finished it, and I was working 3 jobs, pay for school and all of those kinds of things. Um, and so I finished my master's so burned out that I didn't even really remember being told, hey, you got good grades. This opportunity to do a PhD scholarship has actually opened up if you want to take it. I left university. I worked as a cashier at a bakery for a year. I went to art school and I was like, this might be it. I don't think I can handle being in this environment anymore. Like, it's just taking too much. And it was only when I met my, now husband, he was like, "Hey, you should try doing the PhD. There's an opportunity there for you to actually do it." I went to my university's learning center and I said, "Look, if I'm doing this, I need to know if there's something wrong with me. Like, just give me all your tests," which luckily I could do. I really appreciate them for having that. And they did a bunch of tests on me, like clicking things, eye movement tests, things like that. And they said, hey, we think you have ADHD. We think you should go get tested. And that was
Hmm.
the first time I heard about ADHD in adults, because I had heard about it in kids. I'd even taught about autism and ADHD and things like that in kids, but that was the first time, and it pushed me into a totally different world where suddenly there was theoretically an answer, but like you, I was given, medication and that's it. But I had access to the university, so I started researching myself what people were doing, and looking for those answers myself.
You mentioned burnout. Is that a fairly common byproduct of ADHD?
Yeah. Yeah. Very,
Yeah.
very common. If you don't have the strategies, it's sort of like the often the results, of like trying to do things, because there is so much extra weight and effort. And often people will say, I feel lazy. But when you look at what they're doing, you're like, you're working really hard. It's just not outputting enough because you're doing it in a way that is just diametrically opposed to how you naturally want to work.
What's going on in the mind there with of somebody that has ADHD that's working really hard, but theoretically, they're working in what I like to describe as sort of bigger circles, right? So like
Yeah.
working in sort of a circle, and then just like a slightly bigger circle, and then like a slightly bigger circle, but it's never really a lineal line. So you get all this like, you're working a lot during the day, during the week, during the year,
Hmm.
but you're sort of working in this cyclical way of thinking, versus probably what you were talking about exactly there is having a structure in place to really move things forward. Because as somebody with, and as I've been learning more about ADD and ADHD, is losing attention on certain tasks is a byproduct of that, but also one of the superpowers of it is actually hyper focus and being able to focus very diligently on the things that capture your attention.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's an interesting one with ADHD. People often say to me, like, is it a superpower? Is it a disability or anything like that? I tend to refer to it, and I work with, most of my clients are not diagnosed. This is something that they resonate with. They often have kids, like you said, who struggle with this. It's a way of working that has very strong strengths and very strong weaknesses. So it's that spiky profile. And so
Mhm.
often what's happening is people are leaning into their strong weaknesses because they're told to do it that way, because the people who are taught them to do it are the people who work well in their area of weakness, and they're not leveraging their strengths because those are not the strengths of everybody else. And so often what's going on is they're doing, they're doing things in the opposite way. Um, yeah, I can give you an example if that would help.
Please. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the things we have seen, and if you're a neuroscientist out there, I apologize because I'm always going to butcher this slightly. It's still a very developing area, but
I mean,
when
I'm no Huberman, but I'll
yeah,
take it easy on
gosh,
you.
yeah. Um, but when you're looking at how the brain works, often there is a spike that you can get when you do a task, because if you're somebody who doesn't have ADHD symptoms, you're like, right, I'm going to give myself a reward after this. I'm going to go outside, I'm going to get a coffee, and that's going to be great. And so eventually your brain kind of gets to a place where it's like, okay, cool, this is what is going to happen. So let me give you that little stimulation spike now, that little good job. You're going to do something at the beginning of the task to encourage you to do it. Awesome. But if you have an ADHD brain, what we seem to be seeing is that you don't get that. Or if you do, it's like it's lower. And so your brain starts a task and goes, well, this is going to be so boring. And who cares about what's going to happen at the end of it? It's not now. Now I'm doing this and it sucks. And so that makes it extra hard for you to start. And that's, sometimes where we can see procrastination and things like that coming in. So one easy shift is to give yourself a reward for starting a task, not worrying so much about the reward at the end, because the reward at the end is that we're not doing it anymore, if we're being honest. So, that's a very useful skill. But if you tell somebody to do that, often they're like, well, that's not what I was taught. That feels indulgent. But it's, I've seen lots and lots of people crack procrastination using this and other systems that we've taught because of how our brain works.
Yeah, that's how does dopamine affect that then? Because essentially, I mean, it sounds like you finish a task, you hit a goal, you reward yourself. There's this sense of accomplishment, this hit of dopamine that you get. But it sounds like in ADHD, maybe that reaction or the chemical of dopamine specifically, how that acts or reacts to whatever else is going on in your brain may trigger things a little bit differently. Is there anything to do with dopamine?
Yeah, 100%. So when we look at the brain, and people have in research, they find that people who struggle with ADHD are the people whose brain is literally reacting differently to the same kind of stimulus. So the way your brain is lighting up, especially in the sort of frontal area of your brain, indicates that we are looking at differences, like very concrete differences in how dopamine and other things are being processed or transferred, and that's part of what you're seeing here. So a lot of times it feels like this is, especially because of how it's diagnosed when you fill out a form, it feels like this is very, well, you say the right thing and you get the form and then it's done. But when you look at the neuroscience behind it, which is one of the things I love to do, you can see some more concrete differences. And I think for a lot of people, that's very, very interesting. And again, it doesn't mean everything, but it does indicate those strong strengths, strong weaknesses that we were talking about.
Yeah, and the idea of sort of getting that dopamine hit just for starting, but changing the framework of, okay, we're finding this sense of accomplishment at the beginning of the task versus the end of the task, and having to wait that long because so many things can happen in between trying to complete the task or hit the goal before you actually get there, that you get to a place where you're really just unsatisfied with the whole process because you never allow yourself to feel that sense of accomplishment, or allow that dopamine hit that you maybe need, that's going to keep you motivated and keep you going, or at least guide you and let you know that the direction that you're heading is doing the right thing, versus something else. Am I kind of on the right page there?
Yeah, exactly. And it's also, I would say when we talk about dopamine, one of the things that people often say is, oh, well, I'm trying to eat healthy, so I don't want to do that. And so one of the things that, because they assume I'm talking about like a chocolate bar or something, or like
Mm.
going on their phone. And so one of the things that I often talk to people is this idea of sensory stacking as the reward. So it's not necessarily like dopamine spike, if we talked about Huberman, it's not this idea of like, okay, let's get out the chocolate bars and the phones and the video games. It's more about how can we increase the stimulation in your environment and stack different forms of sensory stimulation in a way that makes what you're doing feel better. So to give you an example, sorry.
No, I was just going to ask if you could give us a practical
Yeah.
example of
Yeah,
what that
people
looks
often
like.
ask for an example at this point. Yeah. So if I said to you, hey, I need you to fill out this form, it's detailed, it has a lot of steps, got a lot of those click boxes, and you have to like press them in the right order and those kinds of things, those terrible forms. And you'd be like, oh, okay, fine. It's like at the bottom of your list. But if I said, okay, can you do it? But I'd like you to do it in a hammock on the beach with a, drink of choice, listening to your favorite music, and the sun is like the perfect amount of warm, for you, you'd be like, oh, I could do it. I think I could probably fill out that form. And the reason is because you're getting, touch, taste, sight, sound, smell, stimulation that allows you to feel rewarded for starting the task.
Real quick before we get back to the show, if you have heard anything on this podcast that has resonated with you, or if it's helped you in any way, appreciate more than anything in the world if you could go hit that subscribe button or leave us a review. It helps us tremendously. I want to go back to being able to continue to serve and do more and more and help out and get bigger and bigger guests on, better and better. The only way that I can do that is with your help. I'm so honored to be here. Let's get back to the show. Appreciate you. Have a wonderful day. Yeah, you mentioned leaning into the things that you weren't good at, or the things that you were told were that you were struggling with and that you should fix because of, versus leaning into the things that you were really good at. And that was certainly my experience, right? I was incredibly bad at math, but exceptionally good at snowboarding. And so for me, I was like, why does nobody appreciate how, the time that I'm spending on the mountain and how much, how much I'm excelling doing something that I love. And that wasn't praised really by anybody. Where I was getting pushback from was, you're not doing great at social studies. This is where you need to focus your time. You're not doing great at math. Like, this is really where you need to double down on. And I couldn't really comprehend it, and started spiraling into this years of depression and just feeling like I couldn't accomplish anything because of these external forces and people telling me just constantly that what I was doing, it wasn't good enough. It wasn't, I wasn't going to, make anything of myself. I wasn't going to be able to make it in society. And it was just the things that I wasn't good at were the things that my teachers and my counselors and my parents deemed as being, the North Star of being successful. And I wasn't meeting any of that criteria. And it took me a long time, in fact, until well after high school, where I decided, and I was living on my own, and I had started my career. I didn't know it was going to be my career at that point, but I had started, my first big boy job right after high school at 17, and it was. I actually got fired from McDonald's at the age of 15. That was my first real job, but we can get into that story down the road. But again, too much beeping going on, I think, and I didn't really wasn't really McDonald's team material. But it wasn't until after high school and I found something that I truly loved that I decided I wanted to learn, and I had this yearning to actually learn more and put some of these areas of math and different skills that were being taught in high school into actual practical applications. And when I went into trade school for my first year, I remember doing trigonometry, and I loved it. And I
Mm-hmm.
never ever thought that I would say that I loved trigonometry or that I loved math. And I had to rewire um, my brain and just the attachment that I had to the idea of math, because before it was this thing that I had to do. It was this
Yeah.
thing that I was told I wasn't good at. And so I naturally just tried to get away from it as much as I could. And I put up this barrier and this stigma between myself enjoying something versus not. And it wasn't until I made that decision on my own and found out how it was actually going to be practical in the real world towards the goals that I had for myself, where I decided I was going to change my view on things. And
Yeah.
I really started to fall in love with the things that I never ever thought that I would.
Yeah. 100%. And when we look at that resistance, because a lot of times when I'm working with adults, and I don't work with kids, so I'm not telling anyone how to educate their children, but when I'm working with adults, especially, there's three reasons that people are putting things off or procrastinating. And sometimes they're procrastinating on the thing that's the next $1 million shift in their business, for example. So these can be huge things. It's because it's one, too boring, and that's a real thing with ADHD. There's a lot of almost physical pain that comes from something being too boring, like an internal itchy feeling and other things that we don't always describe, but are there and you can see them. It's too confusing, the working memory of it all. We resist planning it for some reason because it should be easy. But in reality, there's a whole bunch of subtasks and subtasks, and this should really actually have been 5 projects, but the time blindness made it hard to see that. That means it can stop. And then the last one is emotional. It's emotionally salient, or it's an emotional thing. And when we look at that, it's like ADHD does have a connection to rejection sensitivity and being a little bit closer to that emotional side. So if
Mm.
something feels like it's going to end up with rejection or it's been bad in the past, that tied to all those other things as well can make this a no-go.
So inherently, there's a sense of fear, I suppose, or um, maybe more so than in other people, because there's these loops of just um, looking back at the current attachments, like I was referring to earlier, to things that
Mm-hmm.
are maybe negative, that may stop them from doing that. And you mentioned being confused, right, as far as what the next steps could be. And quite often people have an understanding or a sharp feeling of intuition that this is the right direction to move, but there's this frontal cortex thing happening right here where the mind is really trying to work hard to prove your intuition wrong, and trying to find ways to, or things to come up with to protect you rather than to move forward. And I think you get caught up in a loop of thoughts that really stop you from taking that next step.
Yeah. And often taking that next step is the thing that I'm working on with people, is identifying what is stopping them from taking that next step, and then the next one after that, and how to unblock that. Because when you struggle with ADHD, it's kind of what we talked about, a lot of the traditional advice does not work. Or if it does work, it works very much like you're giving 150 to get an outcome on something someone's giving 50 to get. So
Mm.
you're like, yeah, it does work when I do this and I tell myself this thing and it's not necessarily healthy, etc., etc. And someone else was like, oh no, I just was like, we should do it, and then I started. So it's like a very different way of doing things. And especially when you struggle with ADHD, we do have a lot of the stuff that feels easy is, I worked with a client who worked at Google, and she talked about this idea of, it feels like when I have ADHD, hard things are easy and easy things are hard. And that can often
Mm,
be what it feels like living in the world. And it's, we see that when we look at the research. People who struggle with ADHD symptoms will, by the time they're older, have received at least double the amount of criticism compared to people who don't struggle with this, because they'll have been told, even by people who are well-meaning, like, hey, you're doing this wrong, you're doing this incorrectly, like, let's do it like this. And so that can shift into self-criticism, which can be one of the reasons why you have that emotional. There's other reasons as well, but that's just one of them.
yeah, well, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. Maybe this doesn't have anything to do necessarily with ADHD, but certainly the self confidence that you build when you have people that are encouraging you and supporting you along the way versus telling you, hey, you shouldn't be doing this, or hey, what you're doing is wrong, or hey, you have a problem, you need to get it diagnosed, you need to get it fixed, and you just start to develop the stigma. So when you're starting to make decisions on your own, you're 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 not necessarily following that intuition, because your
Yeah.
intuition that you have followed in the past has been told by other external forces,
Yeah.
or people, or in my case, teachers, parents, counselors, etc., that it was wrong. And so you start to question whether or not these next steps that that you should take, that you feel that you should take, that this longing that you have that's pulling you in a certain direction, you should maybe look at that harder than somebody else, because you have this track record of being told that you should do things very differently than you have been in the past. And
Hmm.
that just kills confidence.
Yeah. And it's really sad, because one of the things that I love working with clients is increasing confidence, because actually, yes, there's this way of thinking about it like that, but you can also think about it like, hey, you do things differently, still super cool. You can, when we look at the research, you can creatively problem solve, you can, think outside of the box, you're a real asset in a room where we need some original thinking. And we can see that from the research. That's not just me making people feel better, you know and but so let's use some of that, and let's work to your strengths, and let's figure out how to support your weaknesses, and minimize them, and let's get some really cool stuff happening. And so often that's not the conversation, but if that is the conversation, it can lead to a lot of confidence, because you're like, oh, but I'm great at these things. And actually, if I asked some other people to sit in a room and think of 5 unique original ideas to solve this problem, they would be completely lost.
Yeah. Let me ask, is there a introvert versus extrovert trait there in people that are diagnosed with ADHD? Are they tend to be more extroverted? Because when you hear ADHD, you think hyper, right? So you think,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
there's this crazy person that's running around the room, and
Mm-hmm.
they're over here and they're over there, and they're talking to this person and that person. But my experience knowing people that have ADHD, a lot of them, they really are introverts. And in fact, they aren't hyper on the outside. They're not running
Mm-hmm.
around, they're not bouncing off of walls, but their thoughts, it's more internal, and they actually prefer to be, or they lean towards introverted tendencies, because it provides a sense of calm versus
Mm-hmm.
being out there and not having any walls, and just running around all over the place. Is there any correlation between introverts and extroverts in ADHD?
That's a really good question. And it kind of comes back to the conversation you had about ADD and ADHD. And I don't know if there's research on this, but these days, if you get diagnosed, as ADHD primarily hyperactive, ADHD primarily inattentive, or ADHD combined type. I'm a combined type,
Mm.
so I get I get everything. Um, and
All
when
the
you
good
look
stuff.
at, yeah, all the good stuff. I'm the ambivert of the ADHD. Um, and um, and when you look at what it means to be ADHD, primarily hyperactive, you're getting asked questions like, do you tend to interrupt? Do you feel like you're driven by a motor? Like all of these very extrovert leaning questions. And if you're diagnosed primarily inattentive, you get asked like, do you get distracted? Do you zone out? Da 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 da. It's more like in your head versus in the environment questions, if that makes sense. Um,
Yeah,
and I
totally.
don't know because I haven't seen research on this, but I wouldn't be surprised if there is a personality difference there as well that is kind of correlated.
Yeah, I know personally, I have a tendency, if you ask my wife, that I'm always thinking about something else. We'll be mid conversation and she knows, she'll just stop and she'll say, "What are you thinking about?" And I have to like, come back to the conversation. And sometimes it's really hard to concentrate on having that conversation. But if something in the conversation comes up and all of a sudden you start thinking about work, you can have that conversation directly with somebody and look at them in the eyes, but your brain is elsewhere.
Yep.
And so focusing and paying attention is really difficult in a lot of ways. But when you're locked in, you're engaged, that's really like you're only focusing on that task at hand or that conversation and really nothing else at all whatsoever. So I've felt extremes on both sides, certainly in my life.
Yeah, yeah, and that's what you see with primarily inattentive ADHD, which is that sense of like zoning out more or getting distracted. But it is really difficult. I worked with clients who've, meetings, office meetings have been a, bane of a lot of people's lives because they will struggle incredibly to pay attention. Um,
Mm,
unless this is the most important meeting in the world, like the ability to stay focused is something that I've had to discuss in depth with a lot of people because it's hard to do.
yeah, I've been training jujitsu for about, I don't know, 14 years now, something along those lines. And the reason why I love jujitsu specifically is it's one of the rare places that I can go, and one of the things that when you're doing that, it is literally the only thing that you're thinking about. Like
Hmm.
there's no other thought about anything else that's going on in the world except for like right there in the moment. And that, I mean, that can be whatever you find that's close to your heart and you enjoy. But for me is one area that I know I just feel totally different if I spend an hour or 45 minutes just highly focused on one very specific thing and not think about anything else at all whatsoever. And there's very few activities throughout the course of the day, the week, the year that I could say that about, where you are just actively engaged. Like sometimes for me to focus, it takes, two sets of headphones, earplugs, headphones, like goggles, light in one direction, like sit, get it done. But the other thing that you mentioned was hard things are easy and easy things are hard. And I wonder, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong here. I'm just speaking out loud, but with that, I have to question if there's a sense of attacking harder tasks because you've been faced with the idea that like these tasks have been hard in the past, and there's a correlation with some sort of self worth or being told that these are the tasks that you need to focus on. So as you go through life, when these tasks do come up, that you do know that like there's a higher chance of somebody criticizing you if you fail, like you really double down on that because you want to prove it to not only yourself but the world that honestly isn't paying attention at all whatsoever, but it's just this thing that's going on in your mind. So these hard
Hmm.
tasks you tend to focus time and energy on, but the easier tasks you kind of put to the side, and maybe they don't get done when they should because they don't feel like a priority, because these these higher forms of challenges feel like the ones that you should be more focused on, even though that may not be the truth. And even though it may not be the thing that's actually going to move the needle in your life or your business.
Yeah. It's usually about the level of stimulation you have around an activity. So, for example, if you're doing a basic admin task that nobody cares about, that doesn't have a specific deadline, that task feels impossibly difficult to start and to do because it's like it does in terms of like levels of stimulation, it's like a negative 10. But if you have
Yeah.
a task that's like due tomorrow, maybe you're going to be on stage to present it, da 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 da. Like that's the thing that we're focusing on. With the
Yeah.
exception of if it's emotionally vulnerable, you might put it off anyway because of perfectionism, and those things can kind of cloud the issue as well.
Mm. What is the difference between ADHD and ADD? What is the H there really start to define?
Yeah, so the ADH, so there ADD doesn't exist anymore for the purposes of diagnosis.
Oh, okay,
It's
I didn't know that.
yeah, it's something that people don't talk about it, but it used to exist, and now what they're just going with is they're going with ADHD primarily inattentive, which is what ADD used to be, sort of, and then ADHD primarily hyperactive, all combined. Those are
Mhm.
the options.
So I was just dating myself when I was talking about I was diagnosed with ADD
Everybody,
previously. So
everybody does
now that
that. Yeah,
it's like it's the blockbuster of ADHD. It's no
yeah,
longer around.
yeah. Well, there's
Okay,
things that it
yeah.
used to be called even before that, and I can't remember. A couple of people have said that they had something, and I was like, wait, what? Which is like
What?
even before ADHD and ADD.
You mentioned you work with a lot of people that are trying to identify the things that are holding them back from these next steps that they need to take. And I imagine this is a bit of a loaded question and probably very different for each person. But if one was to start introspectively to understand I'm dealing with ADHD, I know that there's steps that I need to take, but I'm having trouble identifying what that is. What's the advice that you would give them? Like, how do they start to identify the steps that they need to take, or are there
Mm.
tools that they can use, or um, if you identify in somebody that they may have ADHD and you want to encourage them or work with them, whether it's a friend or a spouse to help them see what the next steps could be, where would they start? What
Yeah.
does that look like?
So it is interesting, and we do have a program on it. So it used to be personalized, and now we've kind of been able to build a program after so many years of working with people on these things. It really is the first thing we want to do, and I work with business owners specifically, is identify what is the thing that we come to the point that is the most broken about your business. And, it
Mm.
might be delivery, it might be acquisition. Often people are kind of vague on even understanding what that is. And sometimes that's because they struggle with decision making, which is another ADHD struggle. And so we work through that, trying to figure out, okay, what is the piece that's going to have the biggest impact, the truly important task, often the one you've been putting off. Once we've identified that, then we go in and go, okay, what is the ADHD struggle that is stopping you from doing this truly important task? Because often once they've identified it, they're like, oh yeah, I'm supposed to do customer acquisition and not rely on referrals all the time. But the last time I did that, writing a spreadsheet was so boring and I didn't want to do it. And then I didn't know how to hand it off to anybody else. So, you know, that we just didn't do it. We just went, oh, something else. And then we disappeared and never came back to that thing. And so then we come in and we go, okay, so these are the main reasons you're struggling. Number one, it's too boring. Number two, etc. And actually, the thing that people often come to me first and say is, well, I don't have time to do it because I have 200 things to do just today, and I'm not going to get any of them done. And that's going to be, that's going to be my day. So because of that, the first thing that I often teach people is something called a prioritization filter. And I'm happy to take you
Mm.
guys through it today as well, if you'd like.
Yeah, please. We're all ears. That'd be great.
No worries. Okay, and I will say I do have a GBT that runs you through this. So if you want it, you can just DM me at Unconventional Organization on Instagram, message me Brandon, and then I'll know it came from you. Um,
Heck yeah. I'm gonna do that right after the show. For sure.
but if you go through it, the first thing we want to do is we want to just find a space, ideally a space you can use again, like a Word doc or a journal or something. And we want you to write down all of the tasks that are in your head, work, home. Don't look at your email list. Don't look at your old list. Just whatever is in your head. We want to get your working memory empty so that we can actually use it for thinking about stuff. So we write down that task list. Then the next thing that we want to do is we want to look at the things on that list and say, okay, what has to be done in the next 24 hours, or there will be a significant negative external consequence. And one of the ways that I get people to think about this is if your day went sideways and you ended up in a waiting room for some reason, and that was your day, you were going to be there all day. What is the thing that you would still try and do on your phone or contact someone and said you can't do that, you can't do it tomorrow? That's truly urgent. Everything else, not truly urgent. So at this point, usually people are doing like -5 things. I worked with a client on it this morning. She's super busy. That's the thing she came for. She only wrote down 3 things. So most people don't have things that are as truly urgent as they think. Then from there, we're going, okay, now that we've identified what's truly important in your business, what's the thing that's really, this is the next thing you need to do? And it's going to be something probably mundane. You need to build a spreadsheet of people that you want to contact or clients or something, build a SOP for delivery. Then we talk about, okay, that now you have time and space to do that. How do we get you to actually start? And that's the beginning of the prioritization filter. It goes into it more in the GBT and what to do with a week, et cetera, et cetera.
I love the waiting room analogy because it's very timely that you bring that up because the other day I went to the emergency room. It was I had this headache come on and I felt like I had something between my teeth the other night.
Mm,
And I tried to floss and there wasn't really anything there. I was like, that's kind of weird. And then I went to bed and I woke up at about 10:30 p.m. and I just had this splitting headache. I had no idea what was going on, and it just started pulsing. It was the jaw. It was like the back of the head. It was the
mm,
eye. It was like wow. It was just this incredibly, insanely painful experience that I had never gone through before, and it would come on really really heavy for like 15 minutes, and then it would go away and disappear for 3 or 4 minutes at a time. And I figured this out, like this was a pattern all night. And at about 5 o'clock in the morning, I drove myself to the emergency room and I was waiting there. And I was there until noon that day.
mm-hmm.
And the same thing, I'm like, okay, what are the things that I need to do today? Everything else I can just write off completely because I'm not going to be able to do it. I'm in so much pain. I'm not going to be able to get to it. What can I
Yeah.
put off? What do I absolutely need to do right now? And I, I went through that exact same process that you're describing right now. So I love that analogy of if you were in the waiting room and you couldn't do anything, you were in pain, like what is the one thing or two things that you would absolutely make
Mm-hmm.
sure that you still got done that day?
Yeah. Yeah. No, definitely. And yeah, exactly, right? Real world experience of that. And the next question I often get at that point is people will say, oh, that's cool, but like, what about the stuff at the bottom of my task list that never gets done, that sort of hangs over you, and maybe you have some negative self talk around it? The truth is, your job is not to complete your task list. Your job is to do the things that are truly urgent and focus on the thing that's going to really move the needle for you, that important task. And so often with people, what they find is when they start lining up these dominoes, these truly important things, and knocking them down, instead of building a house of cards of trying to do everything at once, they get the resources and time to do those things way faster than they would expect.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it resonates a lot. And side note to that, that was why I was like 15 minutes late to our podcast today, was because
Yes.
that issue that I had. It turned out
I
it
thought
was
that
a
might be it.
it was a nerve issue and a tooth issue, and there was a spot that opened up at the dentist. So I came flying in here after a emergency root canal that that I
Yeah.
went through today. So appreciate that.
I appreciate you
A-
coming.
ADHD. I mean, this is one of those things though, right? It's on the list. Like I could put it off, but to me, it was a priority. I was able to clear a lot of stuff off of my calendar today, and I know that I'll get to it at some point. But this was one thing that I wanted to make sure that I was going to, like, come hell or high water, I was going to get done. So this made it onto the important side of the quadrant.
Hmm.
Let me ask the ADHD, genetically driven or environmentally built?
Oh, oh, that's a question. Everybody
What's
wants the
your
answer to that question. Yeah.
is there the studies that are out there that you're aware of? Is it a combination of both, or is there a certain direction that the studies are leaning? Because for me, I don't have anybody else in my family that I'm aware of
Hmm.
that struggles with ADHD or any sort
Yeah.
of learning disability. Arguably my sister, maybe a little bit. I love her to death, but uh, either way, I like I feel like when I was younger, when I was a little kid, I never had any of that. And it wasn't until some of these informative years in early high school, parents were going through a divorce, things where, you're starting to figure yourself out, trying to figure out which sort of friend group you fit into, being told that you had a learning disability, all of these things sort of added up. And I felt like for me, it was certainly more environmental. But I've been trying to explore the idea that maybe there was some genetics involved, and certainly, with a lot of friends that have children and young children, they're trying to figure out as well, is this just the way that kids are? Is there something that I'm doing as a parent that's contributing to this? Is it anything that I should be worried about? Is there anything I can do? Or is it just out of control, and this is who that person is, and now we need to navigate around, building a life to help
Hmm.
contain this?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, two things. One is it is very genetic. So they've gotten to the point now where if somebody gets diagnosed with ADHD, and this is probably what you're seeing, they will then go look at the parents and be like, okay, which one of you, which family tree is it coming from? And sometimes, and often they will find it is very genetic, and people who didn't realize they have it will find out they had it because their kid has it. And also, if you're in a family where ADHD traits are very common, you will probably hear people say, "Oh, that's just like Auntie so and so and Uncle so." Like that's normal. That's not a thing. So sometimes that can be the case as well. Just the environments we're used to. But there is also a conversation to be had about the importance of environment in general. There is, conversations about it used to be considered that ADHD was something you grew out of. Now we know that's not the case. But there is also, research into people sort of getting to the point where they're like, I don't have these symptoms anymore. But a lot of that tends to do with environment. If you're in an environment that is really, really not designed for somebody with ADHD, school is often a good example, which is one of the reasons we find it, then you are more likely to struggle with that. If you're in an environment where you are very, very supported, then and your strengths are being used and your weaknesses are being, managed, then we will tend to find that you don't feel like you struggle with the symptoms as much. So an example would be a person running a business without an assistant and a person running a business with an assistant. One of them probably feels like their symptoms are more of a struggle than the other one.
If you're in a relationship and your spouse has ADHD and maybe you don't understand what it is, you're just starting to realize what it is. How does like communication at the kitchen table, how do people with ADHD like to be communicated with, or what is the best way to capture their attention to sort of keep the harmony in the household fairly well aligned? I'm asking personally,
Hmm.
for my own purposes, but how do they? Is there a typical way that they would like to be communicated with, or that there's a very clear way to get information through to them? Is there certain isms that you may be able to use, or certain things not to say, or certain ways to help keep attention? Because I think I know personally, my wife isn't the only one on the other side of dealing with somebody that has
Yeah.
some attention disorder, and I know she's trying to figure that out, and I'm trying to communicate with her like, "Hey, it's not my fault. It's if you want my attention, it's your job to keep my attention. So what you need to be saying needs to be, it kind of needs to be pretty engaging in order. Otherwise, like I'm just gonna think
Hmm.
elsewhere." But what would you say to whether it's a spouse, or maybe it's somebody that has a business partner and their partner is struggling with ADHD, or there's those tendencies? What are the best ways or paths of communication to help really keep uh, help help them stay focused, or help encourage them in the right direction, so that they have the highest and best impact in what they're trying to
Yeah,
achieve?
that's a great question. So, number one thing, if we kind of zoom out for a little bit, is one of the biggest struggles that you can have as a whole is like this parentified relationship where the person who has ADHD is seen as like the child, or like the person that needs support, and and the adult who doesn't is seen as the person who's like the adult in the relationship. And I've seen this in cases even with the assistant and the CEO. So like sometimes it can be the, oh, I wouldn't know where to find it, and in relationships, connections with your spouse, this can be, even more so the case. So it's really important that both people feel like adults. And that's one of the reasons why when I work with people about strategies, we do not include their spouse in their strategies. There are strategies that they can do by themselves, because that's really important as part of that conversation.
Great
Equally,
point.
we do. Yeah. Equally, we don't want to be in a position where the person who has the ADHD symptoms sees themselves, and this happens more in business, but it can happen in other circumstances as well, as like the, I'm just coming up with genius ideas and everyone's too slow and da 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 da. And like there's a lot of dismissal of, oh, don't worry about the details. We'll figure that out. You're always worrying about that stuff. And then the other person is kind of following behind, like cleaning up the mess. That can happen as well. We want to have, if we take it back to what we talked about before, a understanding that I have strengths in this area, you have strengths in this area. We are opposite, very opposite. We may have almost nothing in common in terms of those strengths and weaknesses. And we really, really respect that about each other. I love that you come up with creative ideas and you're great at problem solving and you've gotten us out of a ton of complicated situations. And you love that I'm, and the other person's like, I love that you are the planner and you're more organized, et cetera, et cetera. So we're respecting each other. When it comes to the communication side of that, just having a conversation, if we're bringing that kind of energy to it, it's often about working memory as a general rule. So if you are told a very long, complicated story that has many parts, but one of them is like, don't forget you need to grab this when we go out, or something else, like we're going to see somebody at 7 on Wednesday, and just remember that. That needs to be somewhere else. It needs to be written down, put on the calendar, put into a task list, etc., because the chances that you are going to remember that are almost zero, given ADHD struggles.
You're using all the examples that are just so close to my heart right now. It's like you know exactly who I am. Uh, for the business owners that are out there that are listening, if you are hiring on an assistant or a key person to help assist you with your day-to-day tasks, and you are somebody that struggles with ADHD, what is the best way to communicate to that person about what to expect as far as the working environment goes, the reality of the working environment that they're walking into, and how you can best be assisted, and how they can best work with you to make sure that you're like, here's where we're sort of drawing the line. This is where I need you. This is how I operate. This is how you're going to get the best out of me. This is how I'm going to get the best out of you. What does that conversation look like, or how does that start?
Mm. So I would say, yeah, when you're talking about this, the number one thing is don't hire anybody that you just get along with. If you're working with someone and you're like, they just get me, everyone else is so not understanding, but we were on the same wavelength and they were also passionate, and maybe they're like, oh, one day I'd like to do what you do. Do not hire that person to be your EA. That is not going to be helpful. That person also struggles with the same struggles you have, and now they're not going to be able to help you with your weaknesses. So number one.
Yeah.
You might not find you get along with your EA initially, and that's fine. That's perfectly normal. If they're going through the process and they're good at what they're doing, that's totally fine, as long as you have a respectful relationship and they're different from you in a way that works. So when we are talking about, okay, what to expect, generally what you want to do is you want to outsource to them all of the admin tasks, that boring executive functioning follow-up task, as quickly as possible, and you want to communicate with them in a way that feels really natural for you. Some people love a voice memo. I know I am one of those people. Some people like to write text messaging. Very few people with ADHD will ever send you an email voluntarily.
Yeah.
So it's usually one of those two things. And so being very clear with them, hey, I'm going to give you this stuff. I'm going to give you an audio memo, and it's going to say, hey, I had a great chat with so-and-so, and we want to do this, this, and this. So can you set up this thing, and that would be great. Thank you so much. Bye. And then their job is to take that, and your job is to build SOPs and things around that. And with my clients, we have GBTs that help make that process really fast. But their job is to take that and then iterate out on it. And so if they're the kind of person who's like, I can't take that information in and iterate out on it, you need to send me a bullet pointed message or else this is going to get lost, or I'm the kind of person you're going to need to remind in a week to have done this because I'm going to forget because point 3 of the voice memo I didn't write down. Neither of those are good people. You need to make sure you're working with someone who can manage that.
Yeah. Great feedback. It's very timely for my situation here as well. So I appreciate that. The time of the day, right? I kind of mentioned Huberman sort of off cuff earlier, but I think he had talked about cortisol spikes in the morning, and where actually cortisol for in a lot of ways is really good, but earlier in the day. So cortisol spikes, a bit of stress in the morning is actually good because that will begin to deplete, and it's actually very natural, but it will begin to deplete throughout the course of the day, where you don't want to have cortisol spikes, or generally at night. So that might be brought on by things like added work stress, reviewing emails, heavy workouts at night that are going to put your body under more stress, which is going to start to affect your sleep. But theoretically, maybe I shouldn't say theoretically. Like I'm not a neuroscientist. I'm just repeating what I have heard and understand to be true. But the levels of cortisol, which are associated with stress and a lot of natural stress that comes up in the body, is relatively good and safe in the morning. But as it depletes throughout the afternoon, you're going to become calmer, which is actually, as we transition into the evening, is going to start helping you sleep better. Are there noticeable parts of the day or things that really contribute to ADHD in, is
Mm.
there times of the day where maybe you're more susceptible? Is that, 90 minutes after waking up after your first cup of coffee? Is it, just before you go to bed? Is it mid-afternoon, maybe when your blood sugar starts to drop a bit? Are there parts of the day where you tend to see, I guess, elevated senses of ADHD?
It's a really good question. So, one of the things I sometimes do with clients who are struggling with energy management is we do an energy chart. So, I've done a lot of these with many clients who have ADHD. When do you feel the most energized? When do you feel the least energized? I'd say most people feel it in the morning, the most energized. Sometimes it's the afternoon. There's a lot of things going on though. Like there is a huge correlation between ADHD and struggles with sleep. So sometimes people's afternoons are really their mornings. There's also people taking all kinds of different medications, which will wear off at different times of the day. So for me personally, don't do a blanket on it because of all of these different factors. I will say I have successfully helped a lot of late night people become really early morning people because it's kind of the same thing for a lot of things. Um, but if you were to ask me one thing that will help you focus and get your ADHD symptoms under control that we have the most research on, it is movement. So there is
Mm.
really, really good research, and they've recently released like a meta-analysis of randomized control, like the gold standard of this kind of research that shows that if you are getting movement, you will struggle less with working memory, with ADHD symptoms, with emotional regulation after that exercise. So often people can sort of, regardless of where they need that energy, they can, if they put movement into the period before, they can kind of re-engage themselves. I personally will wake up, work for a chunk of time, and then I will go for a very long walk and come back, and then I'll sort of have my second day, and that's how I personally do that.
Yeah, I was going to say physical exercise, without a doubt, has been the
Yeah.
biggest determining factor for me for so many years. It's one of the things that I just attribute so much of, personally, just my mindset, my focus, my confidence. I attribute that so much to physical exercise, time in the gym, going for runs, because you can sit there, and I'm sort of like you. I wake up and the first thing that I do in the morning is probably not what I should be doing, which is opening up my phone and going through, just making sure that there's nothing, no emergencies that I need to solve. But I've done that, right? So I've opened it up and I've kind of like I've closed that loop, first of all, because that's maybe something that might be going on in my mind. So at least I've addressed that. And 9.9 times out of 10, I know there's nothing that can't wait. But I just sort of get in this habit of just like, yeah, I just want to make sure that gets out of the way. I'll start get going on a bit of work, and then usually about an hour and a half after I've woken up and I feel like I've gotten a little productive stuff done. Then I'll make my way out to the gym or for a run, and that in a way is sort of what you were talking about. It's like it's because to me you feel you get the dopamine rush of moving, of lifting, of feeling good, the reward of lifting heavy stuff or running quickly, or running in the rain. Like you get that runner's high. So it's almost the highest form of dopamine without substance that you can get as starting your day,
Yeah.
right? So you're getting up and you're back to what you said about finding these dopamine hits or these rewards early on for just starting versus once the whole day is completed. Because at the end of the day, when you've completed your whole day, rarely do you go home and say, yes, I accomplished everything today that I want to do, right? That never happens, because
No.
there's always somewhere in your mind like, I could have done more, I could have been more efficient with my time, I could have sent one more email, I could have had one more phone call, I could have done one more outreach, whatever that is. And you wrap up your day, and now you're tired, you're sort of exhausted, you've depleted your mental energy, and you don't really want to go to the gym. after work.
No.
There's just too many things, too many excuses that can come up during the day to go and get that done, which is why I certainly encourage, everybody's different, but I certainly encourage everybody to try getting out to the gym in the morning
Hmm.
before you start the main part of your day. And personally, I
Yeah.
like to get a few things done just to get the ball rolling, before I get going on anything. And maybe that's doing some writing. I'm in the process of doing some writing right now. So I'll start that, and then I'll get out
Yeah.
and find that reward at the gym. But it does work absolute wonders.
Yeah. And for those people who are listening who maybe are not gym people, because I know like this is, I've had these conversations enough that I sort of know what the next question people say, oh, I don't want to go to the gym, I don't like running. It just movement will do wonders. You can work your way up or down, whatever it makes sense for you. One of my favorite studies was they got a bunch of kids and they divided them in two struggling with ADHD, and one of them they just made them run around the field for like 15 minutes, just wherever they wanted to go, just running around the field, getting their energy out, and then they did a working memory test after that. And the kids who got to run around did better on the working memory test. So even if you're running around the field with your kids, that still counts.
Yeah, I mean, getting out, I think one of the most underrated forms of exercise is walking,
Hmm.
right? It's so easy to do. You don't have to have incredible knees and joints and muscles to put on your running shoes and, just go for a walk, right? But starting with that, starting to make the decision to walk places versus drive if you can get there. But it does so much to get out, change the environment. There's a park nearby the office, and in between meetings, I'll often put my headphones in and just go for a walk up and down the hill to the park and then back. It doesn't take long. It takes me, 15 minutes sort of there and back, but it really does change the mindset. And with running, I love running, but I I have like I swear all my best ideas and my highest forms of focus when I am running. And I keep my phone with me while I'm running, but 9 runs out of 10, I will stop because I'm thinking about something partway through and make notes on my phone, because this is, the thoughts that have come up when I'm running, just because there's this real sense of clarity when you're out, when you're moving, when your endorphins are,
Hmm.
are
Yeah.
running, when you have, you have that dopamine, like that, you're just feeling, really, you start to feel incredible. And in fact, the
Yeah.
name of this podcast came to me while I was running. I had to stop one day and I was like, you know what? It just came to me and I stopped dead in my tracks and I wrote it down on my phone and I was like, that's it. All right,
That's amazing.
let's go.
Yeah. Yeah, and to kind of bring it all the way back, you got told you have ADD, you got given medication as an option, and pretty much nothing else. If I was to go back in time and suggest other things outside of changing your environment and the more specific things, getting enough sleep, whatever that looks like for you, and getting some, really good movement in throughout the day, as part of your day, would have been the two things I would have recommended right off the bat.
Outside of medication.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Is there, how much of a fear is there around medication of the people that you talk to?
Yeah, that's a great question. I recently had Dr. Ryan Sultan on. He has been, working with the university, and he's got ADHD himself. And so we had a really great conversation on my podcast. I always refer people back to talking about medication and going through this, because I myself am not medicated. It's not because I don't like medication. I just, got diagnosed, had a bunch of kids, and it just never became a thing. Now I want to be as ADHD as possible so I can build these systems. Um, but I've seen, yeah, I think there is a lot of fear. And there's also a lot of frustration. To get medicated can take a really long time for some people in different countries. Some countries don't allow stimulant medication at all. And in other places, people will take medication, it will work. They'll be like, this is amazing. And then for other people, it's a full journey. They'll go through a ton of different medications. Some people will never find that it works for them. So it's very complicated. And a lot of people don't want to take it because they're like, I've got here to where I am now, and I don't feel like I want to change it. And then some people change their minds and some people don't.
Yeah. My experience, I was given medication pretty well right away. And I took that for, I don't know, it was about 6 or 7 months, something like that. I found for me personally, it didn't really help with much. I felt very sleepy. I felt just really not like myself. And to me, I was becoming a person who I was taking the medication because I was young and I was told that this is going to be the thing that's going to cure you. And so I started taking it because I thought it was this magic pill. And I personally didn't really like it. This is going back 30 years ago now. But that was, um, for me, I was started taking medication for about 6 or 7 months. And then I have been off of it since and haven't gone back. But I find better results in the things that you're talking about. I'm very diligent with sleep, other than, I have a 7-month-old daughter at home, which
Oh.
really kind of cuts into the sleep sometimes.
Yeah.
But exercise, sleep, whole foods for me, if I'm following that regiment and getting enough water during the day, I feel unstoppable. I
Mm,
feel so good and just so clear headed.
mm.
Love it. Skye, thank you so much for being here today. Where can everybody find you? Do you want to drop your Instagram handle again, and where should people connect with if they want to touch base?
Yeah. So if you want the sort of GBT that's going to take you through how to focus and get things done, you can message me, Brandon, at Unconventional Organization. And if you want to listen to my podcast, you can find it at the ADHD Skills Lab, wherever you get your podcasts. Otherwise, you can find me at Unconventional Organization on the internet.
Amazing. I love it. Thank you so much. We'll make sure that we put that information in the show notes. Skye, thank you so much for being here and for all of your time today. I know it's the weekend where you are, so thank you for taking some time out on a Saturday to chat with us today.
No worries. It's been really fun. Great questions.
Awesome. And to all our listeners that are out there and still with us, as always, we're here rooting for you to win. Until next time, stay blessed. Rock and roll. See ya.